You're a hunter in Ice Age Europe. The sun went down hours ago. Your fire's dying, and the wind coming off the glacier doesn't stop. It just keeps coming all night, like it wants you gone. Winter here wasn't a season. Back then, it was a predator. And tonight, it's hunting you. Here's the truth about how ancient humans faced the killing cold. The brutal, desperate, genuinely disturbing things they did just to see another spring. Because most of them wouldn't. Start with fire, because everything came back to fire. In glacial Siberia, a fire wasn't warmth. It was the line between a living body and a frozen one. But here's the part nobody thinks about. Wood was scarce out on the mammoth steppe. There were barely any trees. So these people burned bone. Mammoth bone, packed with fat, stacked into pits dug right into the frozen ground. Archaeologists have found those pits, rings of charred bone, decades of them in the same spot, used by generation after generation. Think about what that means. A Stone Age family sat around a fire made of the animals they killed, feeding it splinters of leg bone through a night that lasted 18 hours. And someone had to stay awake, always. If the fire went out at 3 in the morning, you didn't relight it, not with numb hands and no dry tinder. You just died, quietly, while the others slept. So they took shifts. The oldest, the ones who couldn't hunt anymore, they became firekeepers. Their whole worth in the dead of an Ice Age winter came down to one job. Don't let it go out. Now, food. Sounds simple? It wasn't. By deep winter, the herds had moved on. The berries were long gone, and the ground was iron. In Ice Age Europe, a group could go weeks without a real kill. So they ate the things you don't want to think about. They cracked open bones for the marrow, sure. But when the marrow ran out, they boiled the bones themselves for hours to pull out the last of the fat. They ate the stomach contents of the animals they did kill, half-digested plants, because it was the only greenery for 100 miles. And when it got truly bad, and this is where it gets dark, they ate the parts of the kill they'd normally leave for the wolves. Hide, hooves, the lining of the gut. Nothing was waste. A frozen carcass buried in the snow in autumn could be the difference between a family walking out of winter or not. So they hid meat like treasure, under rocks, in ice, marked with things only they could read. And they'd fight for it. Groups raided each other's caches, because starving people in an Ice Age valley didn't share. They survived, and someone else didn't. But you can have fire and food and still freeze to death in your sleep. So shelter mattered as much as either. Out on the open steppe, where there were no caves, Ice Age people built huts out of the only thing big enough: mammoth. Dozens of skulls and tusks and leg bones curved into domes and covered in hide and packed earth. One of these, raised on the cold plains of Ice Age Ukraine, was built from the bones of nearly 100 mammoths. Call it a hut if you want. It was really a monument to how badly they wanted to live. And inside, it wasn't just about walls. Clothing kept them alive. And here's the detail that changes everything. They weren't wearing rough furs thrown over a shoulder like the cartoons. Stone Age people sewed. They had bone needles, impossibly fine, carved and polished by hand. And they made fitted, layered clothing, tailored parkas, sealed seams. In the frozen north, a person who couldn't sew, or didn't have someone who could, was already halfway dead. The needle, honestly, saved more lives than the spear that winter. And the ones who mastered it, usually the women of the group, held a kind of power the stories forget. Their hands were the reason anyone woke up in the morning. Something people never thought about: water. In deep winter, every drop was frozen solid. And here's the trap: eating snow to quench your thirst only killed you faster. It dropped your core temperature and burned through energy you didn't have. Ice Age people knew this, So they melted snow by the fire before they drank it, rationing fuel and time on something as basic as a mouthful of water. And then there was the slow enemy, frostbite. Out on the hunt, a hand left bare too long in glacial wind would go white, then numb, then black.
Fingers were tools, and losing them meant you couldn't nap a blade, couldn't grip a spear, couldn't sew. A hunter who lost his fingers to the cold one winter might not survive the next, so they wrapped everything. Firm mittens, hide boots stuffed with dry grass for insulation, faces covered against wind that could freeze exposed skin in minutes. Every bit of it was learned the hard way, by watching someone who didn't do it lose a foot or a life. And they still had to hunt in it. Think about that. Not hunting meant starving, so out they went into the worst of it. But winter changed the game, and some of it worked in their favor. Snow showed every track. A wounded animal bled a trail across white ground that a hunter could follow for miles. Deep drifts slowed the big prey down, and a mammoth floundering chest deep in snow was a mammoth a band of Ice Age hunters could actually bring down. They drove them into gullies, onto thin ice, off small cliffs, using the landscape as a weapon. But every hunt was a gamble with cold. Stay out too long, get caught by a whiteout, and the hunters became the hunted, not by animals, but by the temperature. Groups sent their strongest out for days, knowing some might not come back. And when a hunt failed, when they dragged home with nothing, everyone felt it. An empty-handed return in the dead of that winter wasn't disappointing. It was the clock starting to run out. The body itself fought back, and Ice Age people learned to work with it. When you're that cold for that long, your body starts burning muscle and fat just to keep the core warm, which is why a hungry winter made you weaker exactly when you needed to be strong. So they slept in a pile, whole families packed together under shared hides, breathing the same warm air, sharing body heat like it was currency, because it was. A person sleeping alone in an Ice Age shelter was a person taking a real risk. And they moved with the cold, too. Some groups didn't just wait winter out. They chased the edges of it, following the herds down into sheltered valleys, reading the wind, reading the snow, knowing that the wrong campsite in December was a death sentence for everyone. Sounds simple. It wasn't. One bad call, a valley that flooded when the thaw came, a slope that avalanched, a river crossing that broke under the ice, and a whole band was just gone. No record, no grave. The winter closed over them, and that was the end of the story. Nobody came looking. There was no one left to look. The cold wasn't even the whole fight. The dark was. Up in Ice Age Europe, winter meant the sun barely showed, a few gray hours, then black again for months. Trapped in a smoky shelter, packed shoulder to shoulder with the same faces, listening to wind that never quit, people had to hold their minds together as much as their bodies. They told stories in the flicker, carved little figures out of bone and ivory, painted animals on cave walls deep underground by lamplight. You might think that art was just decoration. It wasn't. It was survival of a different kind, a way to stay human through a night that lasted half the year. A group that lost hope, stopped moving, stopped hunting, stopped caring whether the fire went out. And a group like that didn't see spring. So they sang. They believed. They gave the dark a meaning, because meaning was the one thing keeping them alive when everything else was frozen. And here's the part that's hard to say out loud. Because for all that teamwork, all that shared heat and shared food, an Ice Age winter forced choices that would break you. When a band was starving and couldn't move fast enough, the old and the sick, and sometimes the very young, got left behind. Not out of cruelty, out of math. 10 people who might live, or 12 who'd all die together.
Elders understood this. Some walked off into the snow on their own, so the others wouldn't have to carry them or watch them starve. That was a good death back then, a useful one. And there's a darker layer still. At more than one Ice Age site, in France, in Spain, human bones have turned up cut and cracked the exact same way the animal bones were, for the marrow. Scientists still argue about what it meant. Ritual, maybe? Or maybe, in the worst weeks of the worst winters, the line between surviving and becoming food for the survivors just wasn't there. The people who made it to spring weren't the kindest or the strongest. They were the ones willing to do what the kind and the strong couldn't. If you're the kind of person who likes going this deep into how people actually lived and died thousands of years ago, subscribe, because this is what we do here. So think about it one more time. Everything that let those Ice Age families see another spring. The bone fires, the mammoth bone houses, the stitched parkas, the piled up sleeping bodies, the caches hidden under the snow, and yes, the choices no one wants to name. None of it was luck. It was knowledge, earned in blood, passed hand to hand through the longest nights the human story has ever known. Every single one of those people was a link in a chain that did not break. Winter came for them, again and again, with everything it had, and they held the line. Cold, starving, terrified, they held it anyway. And that's the only reason the story kept going at all.